It's not okay for people to smoke fentanyl or to use other illegal drugs in our public spaces or on our public transit. And the laws on the books need to reflect those basic health and safety standards.
Well, that's Councilmember Alex Peterson explaining his position on some legislation he is sponsoring regarding public drug use and drug possession and making these into gross misdemeanors the city attorney can prosecute. Does he have the support of the rest of the city council? Some interesting political maneuverings going on behind the scenes on this issue this week. Plus, more downtown revitalization projects underway to transform businesses into residential units or other uses. Could this be the year also that Seattle finally connects its two streetcar lines, or at least starts that discussion again? Well, we have all these stories and so much more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are my own. And I am once again with David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I've seen you out being the intrepid transportation reporter that you are, on the road and on the water. How did your first parental test of having a kid on the ferry with you go? The same ferry system that has been canceling boats left and right. Was it okay? What's going on?
Well, this is, for Kitsap Transit's sake, this was on a Kitsap Transit boat. So
okay, thank you.
Ferry boat. And they have been, they've been steady as she goes. They've got their schedule down to a minute. They'd only cancel boats for bad weather. So but they started up their Saturday service, and we took the little one on the boat, and he loves water. He loves anything water. So he had a great time.
Awesome. Okay, good. And thank you for the clarification. I know there's going to be more ferry stories ahead here. So, David, always great to be with you. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. And the Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker campaign needs you. Really hoping to boost this up if we can, folks. Please join us as a patron of the show. For just a $5 a month pledge, you can have a classy-looking sticker for your fridge, for your coffee cup, whatever you need right there. And we feature photos of your stickers on the show, too. We get questions from you as well as we talk about the show. Really try to engage with patrons that way. So please do become a patron, and thank you for your support. Thanks finally to Converge Media. We partner with Converge on the video version of this podcast. Check it out on Converge's YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get going with right here, right now. So, David, as we release this podcast on Tuesday of this week, the City Council has a big decision on its hands. Should it vote to approve the ordinance to make drug use and drug possession into gross misdemeanors, as sponsored by Council members Peterson and Nelson, or should they say no? Plenty of ink spilled about this. We've touched on it too, but now it's voting time. And it's important to understand some background here, folks. This wasn't brought through the council in the traditional committee method. The two council members submitted this legislation to the city clerk, so we don't have a great idea of who's going to vote to support this or vote against it. But we do know a few people on the council are running for re-election. We're talking about Lewis, Strauss, Morales as well. So, David, if you consider the council's more moderate block of Peterson, Nelson, and Juarez as yes votes, let's say, can they swing two more votes? I'm looking at Strauss and Lewis first to get this passed. How do you see this political calculus working out with this?
I think the election context is probably, and that's an interesting one and a good one to consider. We saw in the last election that the kind of defund the police stuff did not work very well. I think probably in response to that election have seen a kind of notable maybe swing, but certainly some toning down of some of the police reform, police change talk. And I think this is a pretty stark example of that. I mean, of course, Ann Davison was elected last election, so that's probably the clearest example of how Seattle was, given a pretty stark choice between a former Republican named Davison and a police abolitionist in Nicole Thomas Kennedy, went with the former Republican. So I think that was a pretty stark temperature taking of the city, and we're seeing that come to fruition now. The thing with these bills, my question is always how this would actually play out. I don't know, because as we've discussed, the police department is not super well staffed, and there's I don't know how many attorneys are available to prosecute drug possession charges. So how this actually would be enforced if it passed is my kind of biggest question with this.
Very much the case here, David. And that's the whole thing. I think we need to look beyond this whole idea of, hey, if you don't pass this, you're weak on crime. I mean, that's the political piece to this. But this is that issue about what actually happens with this if it goes forward or if it does not. And there was a great op-ed in Publicola from Lisa Dugard about this. She's co-executive director of Purpose, Dignity, Action, formerly called the Public Defenders Association. She wrote this: if the ordinance is defeated, its proponents are still correct that we need far more urgency in responding to the drug crisis playing out throughout the city. If it passes, its opponents are still correct that the answer to drug-related problems does not generally lie in jailing and prosecuting people for substance use. And she's getting at this question here, David: is a new ordinance or the lack of a new ordinance actually going to make an impact on the drug crisis Seattle is seeing downtown?
And I don't know the answer to that. I actually thought, and I thought The Stranger had a pretty good point too with an article that they published, I think it was maybe yesterday, about the state's crime lab is super delayed. I wrote about this in the context of DUI prosecutions. I mean, this the county, which handles most of those, they can't even they can't even bring DUI cases right now because any defense attorney worth their salt will ask for a blood test, and to get that blood test is a year plus. We'd look at Geno Smith had a DUI a year and a half ago, and he's since played an entire season, and we still don't know the outcome of that case because of this this backlog at the crime lab. And so, again, even if there are cops to make these arrests and prosecutors who want to bring the case, defense attorneys are going to send this out to the crime lab. It's going to take a year and a half to get those results back. So, there's this sort of ideological, philosophical argument behind this piece of legislation, and that is what it is, and in some ways isn't all that surprising, except for that it, I think, has become much more moderate than the Seattle City Council used to be. But in practical terms, I don't see this being rolled out in any kind of way that looks smooth at all if it is passed. And so I think Lisa makes a good point that both sides here have some sort of reckoning to do about what the real life implications of this.
Right. And I know we were talking about this too with the Blake bill that the state passed, which has a lot to do with drug possession, of course, and turning it from a felony into this misdemeanor, as a gross misdemeanor, as the state has done, and trying to align with that. And I think certainly the city riding some of the political waves from that decision at the state legislature. And you're right about that. That has kind of reached a more moderate level too. So it'll be really interesting to see what the fallout is from this issue. But we'll keep an eye on that, folks, and we'll let you know what's going on there. But I did want to move on to another issue with you, David, a transportation issue that's happening in the Transportation Committee this week for the council, a presentation on renewing the Move Seattle levy. So the renewal of this 9-year levy doesn't happen until 2024, but there's a lot of work that needs to happen in between then and now. And I think we saw this at the outset, David, when this passed in 2015. The levy had a pretty tough start in terms of delivering what it promised on many fronts: pedestrian safety, bike lanes, safe routes to school. SDOT is saying this week the agency is making progress and is on track to meet or exceed the goals of the levy in 27 of 30 programs. Can you give me your thoughts on how the levy is performing in your mind and what SDOT needs to do over the next year and a half to get the support of voters again?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot more to drill down into this than I know for sure. And, it's a piece of reporting that I'd like to continue doing. For me, the one thing that does kind of stand out a bit, which is if you look at what SDOT says it's going to spend, has said it's going to spend every quarter versus what it actually has spent, it's pretty consistently underspending its goals. How much of a problem that is, I don't actually know, because my understanding is some of this money can continue to be rolled out even after 2024. But I think that the department, along with pretty much every transportation department in government right now, I think we're seeing some challenges of, even when there's money there's a lot of difficulties in finding contracting. There's inclement weather. There was the concrete workers strike. So, getting projects up and moving is more complicated than just having the money available. We saw this at the state level. The legislature had put a ton of money aside for finishing a lot of these mega projects in the state. And Governor Inslee said he was worried about whether or not those promises could actually be kept because contractor shortages and crew shortages. And so, that for me, I think is when we're looking at the next year and a half before this levy expires,
Right.
That to me is going to be kind of something to keep an eye on, which is, can the projects that were promised and the money that was promised to be spent actually get out the door properly? And I genuinely don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, and I'll just try to put it in perspective for you here, David. I drilled into the numbers a little bit here. So everybody remembers this was a $930 million levy at the time, the largest in Seattle's history. And SDOT says that through 2022, the levy has spent $626 million. So doing some very quick math there, SDOT needs to spend about a third of that money, more than $300 million. You're saying not necessarily over the course of 17 months, but I mean, the numbers are there. It appears that certainly the pandemic had an effect on this. Certainly the concrete strike had an effect on this. But man, when we're talking about just about a third of this levy that still needs to be spent, I think you're right. I think that's the part of it that SDOT needs to buckle down on it and see where it can start making these projects happen, because that sounds like a ton of money to me.
Yeah, it is a lot of money. And again, I don't know. I still sort of need to figure out exactly how big of a problem that is. But if you look at, I was sort of going through some of this. If you look at the last, basically going back to 2018, when they did their reset on Move Seattle.
Yeah.
And you look at it's, I don't know how many quarters that is. It's 20 quarters or something, 21 quarters.
Okay.
And basically the department has underspent what it said it was going to spend on all but 3 of those quarters. So that's not to say that this is mismanaged, because there are some fairly legitimate reasons why that would be the case between COVID and the concrete strike and some winters, some gnarly winters that we might not be used to around here. But it does kind of get at the larger challenges of actually, you have all this money and actually getting it out the door. It's difficult to do.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for SDOT going forward. Their new director, of course, Greg Spotts, is talking a lot about this and will be over the next year and a half. So we're going to see how that plays out too. So David, thank you for your input on that one. And I know I'm looking forward to some more reporting from you on that issue as well. All right, well, up next, downtown Seattle activation continues. A big plan getting rolled out this week to convert business spaces into residential homes or other uses too. How's that going to work? What impact is that going to have? We're talking about that next on Now Hear This. More news on the downtown Seattle activation front. Mayor Harrell is announcing this week the winners of the city's design competition for downtown office space conversions. So this means conversions into new residential or new commercial uses, and it's part of the mayor's larger downtown activation plan, which he's been talking about a lot. Just last week, he launched the Liberty Project to help businesses run by underrepresented communities, especially Black-owned businesses, to fill vacant storefronts, including ones downtown. And here's part of the message you're going to continue to hear from Mayor Harrell.
By fostering meaningful collaboration between leading small business institutions and Seattle communities, we are taking tangible action to drive economic empowerment and create a vibrant, inclusive business landscape across Seattle.
David, I wanted to touch on this because as exciting as the prospect of this new Liberty Project is to help underrepresented communities, and also this new design competition for what new spaces downtown could look like, it always comes down to dollars and cents for me, because making an investment to repurpose a downtown office space is not cheap, and there's got to be a payoff for the developer who does that work. So think about this with me. Beyond the design competition, the city's work to boost underserved communities, what can Seattle truly do to incentivize this kind of work to happen?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I feel like this conversation, which is pretty prevalent now in Seattle and everywhere. I heard a national NPR discussion about this the other day. It feels a little bit like, this one weird trick to solve our housing crisis, when in fact it appears to be a lot more complicated than and expensive than just kind of throwing up some walls. There are a lot of reasons why office buildings would not make great housing, or to turn them into great housing would cost just a huge amount of money. I haven't, that's not to say it's impossible. I've always been thinking that, we talk a lot about downtown and those big high rises. I was thinking about a lot of the kind of studio space or the smaller spaces, maybe in Pioneer Square, that
Sure.
I haven't heard a lot of discussion about that, but when you go into those spaces, that feels a lot more like something that could be converted to housing. But as far as the big office buildings, I have yet to hear a convincing pitch that sells that as an economical decision, or at least something that's more economical than, say, allowing more duplexes in single family neighborhoods. Or, it feels like a bit of an opt out from what are really the harder discussions, which is that, density is probably needed in more parts of Seattle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a great point there about that whole missing middle housing debate that we've talked about on this program, and a lot of people have talked about too. Hey, it's great that you're expanding this possibility for developers to build duplexes, fourplexes all over the state, but it still has to pencil out for them to do it. I think that's part of it. And it was interesting, David. I looked into a little bit of this with Portland when it comes to converting office spaces. So they're kind of working on this too. And that city council in Portland actually relaxed some of the rules that are needed to convert these spaces, hopefully making it easier for developers. They did that back in March. And it's not like people are beating down the doors to do this. I mean, when you talk about putting in electrical infrastructure, when you talk about putting in different plumbing, et cetera, I mean, are you going to drill through, the concrete of these different office buildings to make that happen? That's where I'm just not so sure how it's going to. I'm not saying it can't work, but I'm not sure how it's going to work. And will there be developers willing to spend the money to make it happen? Yeah,
it feels almost like you need one kind of test project or one good example of this working. I don't follow this stuff super closely, so maybe it exists out there, but I haven't seen that yet, sort of the template that other people could use to go forward this. But I don't know. I mean, I think developers are not, a couple years ago, developers were sitting pretty, things are looking a little less enticing to developers, particularly developers who know how to work with large commercial buildings. Yeah. I don't know that this is a time when those developers are feeling super risky or feeling like they want to take big bets on untested things before. And so, I think until there is a developer willing to make that jump and go big on this and show that it can pencil out, it seems like there's a bit of a logjam there of, I don't know who's actually going to want to make that leap.
Yeah, we will see. Again, I know the mayor's doing everything he can to try to work on this downtown activation plan, and you're going to hear more projects coming through over the course of the summer. This is certainly one of them where I'm going to keep my focus over the next several months, so we'll see what goes on there. But I wanted to move on to another interesting issue, David, coming up in the Public Assets and Homelessness Committee this week. Yes, there's the evolving process as to who's in charge of what when it comes to the Seattle waterfront. We've touched on that before. But one we haven't touched on before is a new agreement on what Bumbershoot is going to look like this year. Quick backstory here, folks. This has been canceled since 2020, since the pandemic. Awesome music festival. We all know it and love it. It looked like it would get off the ground last year, but then it didn't. And now here we are with the golden anniversary, 50-year anniversary coming up in 2023. So One Reel, the producer for decades, is out. There's a new producer called New Rising Sun that's going to be taking over. A group of Seattle art organizations makes up New Rising Sun. And this is just kind of a response to the festival that over the past several years, yes, big bands would show up, but it would turn into a thing where ticket prices got pretty nuts. And this wasn't what Bumbershoot was supposed to be about. So you got a new producer, a focus on more cultural content, wanting to provide free and reduced cost tickets to events. And I'm wondering, David, how is this going to work? Does Bumbershoot survive with bands like Slater-Kinney and the Revivalists headlining here? Do they need bigger names? How's this going to go this year? Do you have any thoughts about this?
I do have some thoughts. I don't know how it's going to go. It seems like there was a bit of a festival bubble there for a little while. It seemed like everyone was putting together a festival, and then a lot of them, I think, have struggled a bit. Bumbershoot, I appreciate the sentiment behind what they're trying to do here. For me, Bumbershoot was never going to be a successable competitor, peer to Coachella or Lollapalooza or whatever those bigger festivals are. So that, they were trying to they brought in Lizzo and, these huge acts, but the ticket prices were just so much. I remember back in my day or whatever, I remember being in high school and tickets to Bumbershoot were, $20 maybe for the weekend or for a day. And even I remember that was like a bump up for a while there. I think it was like, you spend $50 and you get to go the whole weekend. And that was
Right.
great because you just go and you kind of hang out with your friends, and then you don't catch bands that you know necessarily, but you find someone new or whatever. And that was a fun experience. So if they can really kind of recapture that, I can see a future for Bumbershoot. That said, it's not going to have the star power or the draw of someone like Lizzo, but I don't think that was working. It seemed like their attendance at Bumbershoot was not doing well. And so I appreciate that they're at least trying something new rather than sort of beating a dead horse of trying to attract people with these big, expensive acts.
Yeah. And Lizzo, if you're listening, David is clearly a big fan. So give us a shout sometime on the podcast.
I am a big fan, yeah.
I am too. She's incredible, man. We haven't seen her yet, but it's on the list for my wife and I for sure. I did want to talk about this just kind of going forward here. I just see it as kind of going two ways, David. Bumbershoot could be a big win for Seattle in terms of downtown revitalization. We've been talking about that theme a lot. Or maybe it could fall short. And I'm just wondering, how important is it that Seattle gets this right after a 3-year layoff? I think a lot of eyes are going to be on this festival.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if it's like tied to the future of downtown or anything like that. But, I think it would be really good for Seattle Center. There's a lot of momentum, I think, around Seattle Center right now in a positive way. There's obviously the Kraken
and stuff. Yeah.
Climate Pledge Arena and, bids to redevelop Memorial Stadium in an interesting new way. And so if they could add a successful Bumbershoot on top of that, I think that would be a really positive thing. I think if it doesn't work, there's, a lot of sentimentality and I would feel sad about that. I don't know that it would necessarily be some harbinger of a larger issue or decline. I just think music festivals are their own beast, and they have some have been more successful than others. And Bumbershoot has been struggling for a long time, well before the pandemic or anything like that. It just has. I just think they haven't found the right balance of star power and price, and hopefully they're able to do that here.
I hope so too. It's an awesome event. I've been a number of times, and it's that. Apparently what they're trying this year is a $50 golden ticket out there. So, and we'll see how that plays out. But I think finding that balance is going to be what this is all about for Bumbershoot going forward. So something to keep track of over the course of the summer here. All right. Well, coming up, a streetcar discussion that will not die in Seattle, but might it be getting off life support? David's got the scoop on transportation talk. David, you wrote recently in the Seattle Times about the streetcar connector project linking up the South Lake Union line to the First Hill line. This has been discussed for nearly a decade, hasn't gone anywhere, and perhaps for a good reason. Over budget, certainly, problems with the size of the tracks and the cars, you name it. But now there's some new life to this, apparently, and SDOT Director Greg Spots told me about this on a Patrons Only podcast a few weeks ago. He's calling this a cultural connector. New name, different results. What's going on here? What do you think?
Yeah, he has really, it was one of the first things that he decided he wanted to back. I think he sees it as probably a legacy project in some ways, and so he just kind of came in guns a-blazing on this thing and has pitched Mayor Harrell on it pretty hard. The mayor, when he was on the city council, mostly, he wasn't a huge vocal proponent of the streetcar, but also voted in favor of it generally. So he has been someone who's been sort of basically supportive of this idea for a while. But I think this new pitch from this new director has built some momentum. The interesting thing to me here is it's the reframing of it. In 2017, when SDOT was talking about building this thing, they were explicit that this is a transit mode. This is not intended to be a sort of economic development device.
Right.
Greg Spots has changed that a bit. He has started pitching. I asked him, I was like, so what's the parallel here? Is it something like New Orleans where there's a streetcar or Kansas City? And he said, no, my inspiration is the High Line in
New York
Manhattan,
City,
which is not a mode of transportation at all. It's a big park, which is a beautiful park. But his point being like, we're trying to create some kind of piece of infrastructure here that spurs sort of a larger cultural momentum around it, which sounds great. And people salivate whenever you talk about the High Line. But I think the prospect of that succeeding is mixed and uncertain, to be sure. And so, it's kind of an interesting moment. I think it's tempting because it is seen as probably a tool to helping downtown get back on its feet. And we've seen it included in the mayor's downtown activation plan as fairly central. I think there's some argument that it would bolster ridership on the two other streetcar lines, but it's a ton of money. It's a lot of money. I think there would be some federal support for it, but we're talking, I wouldn't be surprised if it's $500 million or at least.
Right.
And remember, this thing was supposed to be 150 to start. So whether it ever actually gets off the ground is the really big question mark.
I'm with you there. And I know you wrote in your piece that Councilmember Peterson, who is chair of the Transportation Committee on the council, not in support of this. And when you talk about those federal dollars, Greg Spotts said that to me too. We're going to get these different federal grants. But I know the last time around, with the way the city was spending money on this, I mean, the federal government actually chastised Seattle basically for the way it was managing this project. And I'm wondering, are the feds really on board with this too? Because that seems like a key to this, trying to get that kind of funding. Yes,
the feds were not pleased that they had, seen $7.5 million of their money basically sit unused. Greg Spotts' counter was, well, then we're proposing to them that we use it. What's wrong with that? I don't know if the federal government holds grudges. There is even more money. There's even more money available for transit project than there was when this first came in because of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. My sense is the city's fairly confident it could get funding for this. How much funding and on what timeline is really the question. And because, if you were to get half of it funded by the federal government, we're still talking $250 million that the city has to put up at a time when they're looking at decreased revenue and needing to shore up their budget already. So, its future, it is building momentum for sure. It's getting more conversation. Its future is far from certain, though.
That makes sense to me. David, thank you for breaking down those different pieces, and we'll keep an eye on what's happening with the streetcar for sure. But we do need to wrap up here. And David, here we are, 60 games into the season for the Mariners. There's this 10-game gap between the M's in Texas and the American League West. I'm not saying it's insurmountable, but definitely not very surmountable. What do you say? It just looks like such a major gap right now, looking out of a canyon almost.
Yeah, I think they've got maybe the next month to show that they turn it around, and if they don't, I think we don't do anything at the trade deadline and wait until the offseason and try and sign Shohei Ohtani, and that's kind of the strategy here because playoffs are looking pretty far off at this point.
Yeah, and it makes me think of just how awesome last year's team was. I mean, talk about grit and guts to get their way through with even less offense than they're providing this year in terms of the big bats out there. So anyway, we shall see. I'm going to keep up hope, David. I know you will too. And thank you as always for joining me, sir. Thanks to everybody listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple, Spotify. You listen to Lizzo, you probably listen to us wherever you like to listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and show your support there, too. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media as well. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.